What if someone tried to make a modern RuneScape style MMO? Well, that's basically the goal of Winds of Valen, a new free-to-play indie MMORPG with sandbox systems, skills, and open-ended progression. After playing it for over 30 hours, here's everything you need to know and if it's worth playing. So, at its core, Winds of Valen is a sandbox MMORPG where players choose what they want to do. Instead of rushing players through story quests and cutscenes, the game is all about exploration, leveling your skills, gathering resources, crafting gear, fighting monsters, and slowly building up your character over time. So, jumping right in, you'll start at the character creator. There's quite a bit for a RuneScape-like game, and for some reason, even years. Now, getting into the world, the first thing you'll notice is the low poly art style. It's simple and not demanding, unless you run at high settings where ray tracing kicks in. Then, if you haven't played RuneScape before, this is where you get lost. The game doesn't have any tutorials or directions to get you started. So, what are you doing? First, you got your main class-like skills: melee attack, archery, and magic. You can choose the main one, or you can do them all since there's no class system. Then, you've got your secondary skills, to the main ones. You've got defense, evasion, warding, and overall HP. These are trained with the main skills, and provide defense in the 3 categories. Now you've got the gathering and production skills: mining, fishing, smithing, and potion making. This is where you'll be gathering better and better resources to process them into armor, weapons, and potions. So yeah, this is exactly like RuneScape. Leveling is also pretty simple: kill monsters and gather resources enough times to level up and unlock the next tier. And as you progress, you'll explore different biomes with new enemies, bosses, resources, and discover new towns on your way. So, why do all this else than to fight tougher enemies, stronger bosses, and build up your character? Well, for one reason. Leveling equals dopamine, and dopamine equals leveling. Now, when it comes to the combat, it's also mostly identical to RuneScape. The game is point and click, and I'll say it's very responsive. You have your hotbar where you can equip 3 weapons, 3 shields, and 3 potion types. And I do think this is a pretty nice feature so you can swap mid-fight with keybinds instead of clicking inside of your inventory. There's also no abilities like RuneScape 3, so it's closer to OSRS with only basic attacks. Now, boss fights also have mechanics, so it's not just who has the higher stats. You need to dodge incoming attacks, learn patterns, have good positioning, and use the right gear against certain bosses to take advantage of their weaknesses. And that goes for all enemies. They all have weaknesses and strengths that you'll want to be aware of. So overall, I think the combat is pretty good for what it is, but possibly seeing abilities like RuneScape 3 or other MMOs could be interesting to add more variety and give the game its own identity. When it comes to PvP, it's very early on, but the game also, just like RuneScape, has its own version of the wilderness called Darklands. In the Darklands, you'll lose all items upon death. PvP is not optional, so you'll want to be on your toes at all time. And there's also good resources out there to make it worth the risk and incentivize hunting down other players. Now, in the game's roadmap, they have PvP arenas planned, which I think could be huge to expand the game's community. They also have PvP boss listed, which I think will be the implementation of bosses in the Darkland. Plus, there's a bunch of small changes and extra content planned from what we can see. As for competitiveness in Winds of Valen, they've implemented leaderboards early on so players have something to grind towards and compete. So, I can see a competitive potential in this game, and with the PvP some long-term replayability, but it's still early on in development, so it's hard to be sure depending on how they balance things out. Now, the overall progression is definitely identical to RuneScape. It starts fast but rapidly slows down. to the point where you're putting in multiple hours just to level up a skill. Gear in the game is also in tiers with bronze, iron, steel, mithril, gold, and up. But as of now, it ends with mithril, and in between there's also rare drops. So the game is set up for players to have long-term goals where they need to level up multiple skills to get to the next tier and character power to fight new enemies, bosses, and content. From the roadmap, we can also see that they plan to release new tiers, mobs, bosses, drops, and areas. So right now the progression feels limiting since there's a lot of missing content, and even though there is no level cap, you'll still be stuck in the same gear. Now the big scary part, what's the monetization like? Right now the game is 100% free to play, but they are working on an optional membership subscription. It looks like they are once again closely following Old School RuneScape's model, where you'll have free access to the early areas and gear, but to access the new content, it will be gated by a monthly subscription. They also made it clear that they do not want to sell cosmetics as they believe it removes from player achievements, and with this, they will not be doing any sort of pay to win. So with this being a small indie game with a team of only 2 developers, I think it's totally fine that they want to go this route with the game's monetization. Now, is it going to compete with OSRS or RuneScape 3 in terms of value offered? Obviously not. But I think for those that enjoy the game's free content and want more, it's a fair model. On the other hand, I would also like to see some more free content added alongside the membership content, as right now, there's not enough when compared to its competitors. In connection to the monetization, they are also adding a community vote feature like OSRS for members to decide what they want to see in the game. And they are being transparent with their development, sharing info and sneak peeks on new content in their Discord while also taking feedback and suggestions. And the roadmap is also a good addition, giving players a clear idea of what's to come. Now, what are the game's biggest problems? First, the lack of story is huge. I don't know where we are, why am I here, who am I, and all of the enemies and bosses are just damage sponges. Second, the lack of direction and tutorials could be bad for new players who haven't played RuneScape before and aren't familiar with this type of sandbox MMO. And third, the low player count. Although the game is in early development and it has a lot more to accomplish before this really becomes a concern, I think it's still important for MMOs to have a good player base because that's what makes the world feel alive. And with players knowing that others can see their achievements, it keeps them playing. So, here's a list of what I like and what I do not like. I like that Winds of Valen is a new title aiming for that old school, grind heavy sandbox feel that defined Old School RuneScape. Although I do think it's fine that they've taken some of the best parts of RuneScape, but on the other hand, I think it's copying it way too much. And I mean too much. Even down to the chicken and cows. I mean, they could have used other animals. Now, I like the progression system. You've always got something to grind towards, and there's a good mix of short and long-term goals to keep you busy. But I think there's a lack of skills that could have been added quite early on, like logging, fletching, cooking, skinning, and content in general. And to be fair, that's not that bad since I enjoyed the game enough to want more. But it still would be nice to see some more of the basic early content. I also do like that they're avoiding all pay to win and cosmetics with their subscription model. But I do not like that they're focusing quite early on the subscription instead of getting a strong base for free to play content. Another good thing they've done is have multiple servers in multiple regions like NA, EU, and Australia. Something else I do not like is the lack of UI customization. After playing similar games, this has become a must-have. And another thing, the graphics. They're modern and low poly, and it actually fits the game, and it does not feel low poly when you're playing. But on the other hand, let me start by saying my PC is not a potato. And when I run Global Illumination or Shadows on high, it uses ray tracing, which uses 100% of my CPU. So I'd like to run the game on high, but I'd also want the option to disable ray tracing. And lastly, another thing I like is that they're involving the community with votes and taking in input and suggestions from the people actually playing. Now, can this game realistically compete with RuneScape or OSRS? The quick answer is no. They don't have the manpower or funding. As for the future, if they expand from their two-man team, the subscription model ends up working out, and they have a good amount of content, I think they'll have a spot in the sandbox MMO space. So, should you play? My opinion is yes. The game is very fun. For the content that it has, you'll spend a whole lot of hours going through it, and if you want to keep leveling to prepare for future content, you can. I think it's also important to know that if you're going to spend or commit a lot of hours into the game, you should be aware that it's still an indie game, so the future is uncertain compared to something like RuneScape where you know the game will be around for a long time. So I really enjoyed everything I got to play so far, and I actually do plan to keep going as I'm really excited to check back in on new content from the roadmap. I'm also interested in knowing what you guys think about the game and if you're going to try it, so let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And with that being said, I'll see you guys soon. Peace out.